Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about home prices, the Fed meeting, and why Trump might be delaying his pick for a new Fed chair. First, I want to thank our sponsor, Trust and Will, for making this episode possible. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
It is wonderful to be here. Today is one of those days where I reaffirm my belief that my father has never, ever read anything I've written, and he has never listened to this podcast once. Ever.
Which is very funny because he's not just your dad, right? Like that's kind of a dad move, but like he's in the industry. He is a loan originator.
Yeah, he's been in the banking business since 1979 and he's still working. So today my father sends me a text message, tells me, hey, I don't know what this spread is. What's the meaning of the spreads? Can you send me anything, an article that I could read about it? And I'm like, really, homie? Really? You have no idea what the spreads is, and you're my father. He's like, what? And I was like, whatever. So it is what it is. It's really funny. I'll put this on social media, and he's done this with me like over the last 15 years, where it's so random, and it's like clearly you've never listened to your son's work or at all. So, but since it's the mortgage spreads, and that's our big thing over the last few years, it just reaffirms my belief. He never listens to anything.
That's so funny. Also, I feel like what we've learned over the last couple of years is a lot of people in the business don't really know what spreads are because you'll ask different audiences and a few hands will go up. It's gotten better over the last year because you keep talking about it. But, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I can understand mortgage spreads are about as nerdy as you get. And, if people have never heard about it, now they do after we give a presentation. But this is like 3 years we've been really emphasizing the spreads. I mean, really since 2023, highlighting this and trying to teach people this because it's such a big thing for everyone in real estate and mortgage. And we never really had to deal with the spreads in the last decade in any meaningful way. But after 2022 it was a big thing. But for him to ask, hey, can you send me a link to talk? I'm like, you never read the tracker 1 week.
So, okay, well, let's talk about, so we've had some data come out, Case-Shiller, of course. Let's talk about home prices because I'd love to get your take on what they found and how that, changes or doesn't change or compares to what you have in the 2026 forecast for home prices.
It's 2025 was just so much fun because, my hypothesis going into the year is I had one of the lower nominal home price growth forecasts. And what happened toward the end of 2024, pricing firmed up when mortgage rates got towards 6%, but then they shot up toward the end of the year. So when we were going into the year, we have another round of inventory growth, but mortgage rates are elevated. So price growth should cool down. Then you have amateur hour. You had all these people that saw the month-to-month decline in the Case-Shiller index and go, oh my God, we have never seen this since the second half of 2022 or 2008. I was like, that's not what it's really telling you, but go with it. And then, of course, Redfin. Redfin came out and gave all the trolling, grifting sites and YouTube pages this data line that oh my God, home prices are going to crash in the second. And the funny part is, for my forecast to be right, the month-to-month data had to be weaker because the year-over-year growth had to slow down. And then what happened, Sarah Wheeler? When did the housing market change?
Yeah, in mid-June, right? We saw it.
Then it was like, oh my God, these people are not going to have an idea what's happening toward the second half because they're going to miss it again. And then a bunch of smart people came on the internet and said, oh, national home prices are falling, right? In the second half. Oh my God, the Fed is behind the curve. Unemployment rates are rising. It's like their home prices are not falling in the national data. So what occurred is when our forward-looking data started to get better, pricing started to firm up. And then what happened is that the month-to-month data in the Case-Shiller index started to firm up. But these people didn't care. They saw the cancellation rates and they said home prices are crashing in the second half because of seasonal. And this is just a lack of not being a data scientist, not being an analyst, not forecasting ever in your life and not following a model. So this whole 6 months, because Case-Shiller lags, it's three months behind where the current data is. But it started to firm up. And then when the forward-looking data started to firm up, oh my God, the slope of the curve, existing home sales started to rise, prices started to firm up a little bit, that whole talk. any of those grifters on YouTube, my God, what a tragic disaster. Because we told everybody this was going to happen. We said, and we told everyone in 6 months they're not going to get it. You know why? Because these are not serious people. But a bunch of smart people came into the conversation and they got it wrong as well. So the month-to-month pricing was a lot firmer than what people might have anticipated. Nothing shocking to us. And we go into the new year after the last 2 weeks of the year. We don't really count. And then the first week, and now we move with the tracker and just follow that, guys. Just follow that and go with it. If you want your own city zip code, go HousingWire, get your Altos data for your own zip code. Stop listening to these people out there. My God, 2025 was flying. It's like one of the most memorable years of being an analyst out there. Not just the labor over inflation, not that we aren't breaking into recession, but the whole housing year flowed with the tracker very well. And we're in 2026 now.
Yeah, remind the audience, what is the 2026 forecast for home price, national home prices?
Now, the forecast is for a slight decline, but why? I'm not fully into the lower rate camp, but if we have inventory growth, anything similar, then, having a slight decline on nominal home prices nationally is there. However, what have we seen in the tracker so far this year? The growth rate of inventory has slowed noticeably from mid-June all the way down. Now, if rates stay 6.25 and lower throughout the duration curve, it's very hard to have, major nominal home price crashes, but just, softness in pricing. Our price cut percentage data might be even negative year over year soon. So we just flow with what the data says. But again, another round of inventory, affordability is still an issue, but because supply is a little bit higher, the pricing curve is a little bit different. And we track it every single week. And if anything, if data starts to really improve again, we let everyone know that that's how you go with it out there. And so far this year, again, like we stressed and what we've shown, it's been the best start to the year in years, but it's also a much different backdrop. Spreads are better. The Fed has already cut a lot. The growth rate of pricing has slowed. You don't have home prices up 10%, year over year. So affordability got better by its own, just by price growth slowing down rates. So it's the healthiest backdrop. And Case-Shiller just reaffirmed we're always going to be 3 to 6 months ahead of the Case-Shiller index, but it just reaffirmed what we've talked about in 2025. And we still have people today who are using the Redfin's cancellation rates as, oh my God, the home sales are crashing and that's the worst. So again, trust us. We've proven ourselves the last 3 years as soon as we initiated the tracker toward the end of 2022, and just let the data talk and ignore all the noise out there now that we've proven ourselves time and time and time again. But 2025 was just flawless in that nature in terms of guiding people into, okay, this is what real data does and how it looks like. That is Crazyville. Okay, so you kind of want to stay away from Crazyville and just work with this. And of course, my job of always is to talk about the national data, national economy, national things that move, because housing data, housing data flows with the 10-year yield really after a qualified mortgage. So we work off of that. But you can do this for any of your cities, zip codes, states, counties, whatever you want. You could break it down. There's over 108,000 cities in America in general. But not shocking with the Case-Shiller and the FHFA, the slope of the curve started to improve a little bit as the forward-looking data start to improve. And we're so far ahead of the NAR and the Case-Shiller index that if anything changes, we'll let everyone know. But it's going to take a few months for the traditional data to hit with what we're showing currently.
So what I want to be really specific on home prices, because you're like, yeah, a slight decline in the gross or a slight decline in actual home prices.
0.62. I always go down to the measure because I try to do the slope. So that's the baseline forecast, right? And then we just work off of the data because we have enough data to say that pricing isn't going to be very to the upside or to the downside on a nominal basis. But now we have to work with the 10-year yield. And so far this year, 10-year yield, mortgage rates, very stable. Mortgage-backed security purchases were called. That's a defensive mechanism to keep rates lower. And then we just kind of go with that. Where last year was a 1.77% forecast nominal home prices, and we're roughly going to stay somewhere around there. The year before was 2.33%, which is lower than other people. But I knew when I lost that forecast toward the second half of 2022, when our pricing data started to firm up, quite noticeably toward the end of 20. So again, we don't believe in the concept of a forecast without a model. So we roll with the data live because that's the most efficient way to talk about things rather than, stick something on the wall and say, I'll see you guys in 12 months. Right. And
Right.
I just don't think that's efficient with how data flows this way. That's where we go. But 2025 was as flawless as you could get we're showing how a real data line tracker works with live information and all the variables that go into housing, right? Labor, the Fed, inflation data, jobs, everything. So,
Okay. When this comes out, it's going to be Fed Day. What are you looking for?
so you know what's interesting on Fed Day for housing? Whenever they ask Jerome Powell, and I kind of make a joke. I did a video of myself and Jerome Powell staring each other down and talking, and basically saying he's probably done his last rate cut as Fed chair last year. But it'd be interesting how he answers housing again, because whenever they ask the Fed about housing, all he talks about is we can't do anything about the shortage. He never talks about like sales or anything. He was very adamant, years ago, said, "Oh, housing is in a bubble," and this, and I'm like, "No, it isn't," but whatever. He's very uncomfortable talking about housing, right? So the irony is that the Fed does control monetary policy. Monetary policy is still 65 to 75% of where mortgage rates could range. And when rates are elevated and demand is low and supply is up, production of housing, what we've seen the last few years, the builders are at the march of dimes, right? Housing permits went down and housing starts went down. But when rates fell, and demand picks up, then you get a little bit more production. So I just think he feels so uncomfortable talking about housing that he uses that token answer. That has nothing to do with any of the questions of what we're saying. It's very simple. A less a hawkish Fed and rates just staying here, better for housing. A more hawkish Fed, if they're looking for production, makes it very hard for the builders. So if they want to keep on going, that's how people should talk about it. But now that mortgage spreads are better, I think the last thing they said is they saw housing stabilize with their regions. But really, we're asking, when's the next Fed chairman going to be announced? Why is Rick Reeder coming out there? I get, like we talked about in the last podcast. I don't believe the White House thinks they could fire a bunch of Fed governors, so they need someone to get the team in together out there. Warsh, both the Kevins are way too tied to Trump, but Rick isn't. And he doesn't want Christopher Waller because he's a Fed person. So that's why his name is picking up. We'll see if we get any clues about, how it's going to look in a few months when Powell is no longer the Fed chair.
It's been a couple weeks since Besant had said, hey, look for this around the Davos meeting. So we all thought it would be like a couple days before, a couple days after. We're a whole week off of that, have not heard anything. So I'm surprised. Well, I thought we'd have an announcement.
If you think about it this way, maybe they were waiting for the courts the whole time. Maybe they were waiting to see if they can fire Lisa Cook, then they could get rid of Austin Goolsbee, they could get rid of Beth Hammack and Lori Logan and replace them if Trump had that power. But if he doesn't have that power, he's got to work with the people in there. And there's where the Kevins might not be so advantaged to him, where a Christopher Waller or a Rick Reeder might be a little bit different. So maybe this was we all looked at it differently. He wanted to wait to see how much power he could, do over the Fed and then pick his person based off of that. Because let's just say he hypothetically picked a Kevin Hassett already, and the Supreme Court says you can't fire any Fed. Well, is Kevin Hassett really? Or even worse, Warsh. He picks Warsh. Everyone hates him. And now they can't fire anyone. And now it's just like, okay, this is a guy I don't like. I really don't want to cut, so maybe he was just waiting to see what the courts do and then work off of that. That is kind of a plausible mindset to have with the delay in choosing out there, because it's a really big deal if the White House could start firing Fed governors because they're too hawkish. Like, I would never endorse that because we keep these entities separate from each other. But maybe that's the reason we haven't got a new Fed chairman announced yet.
I think that makes a lot of sense. More sense than anything else I've heard. Logan, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, appreciate you and talk to you soon.
Pleasure.